Stay with me. We have to go.
The pain. I can't.
You have to, for them.
Okay, help me up. If they find those children, they will kill them.
If they find those children, they will kill them. The words came out in broken, desperate English. Barely a whisper, barely enough air behind them to survive the cold. Lynette Rowan pressed herself against a rusted metal crate, her back flat, her breathing so shallow she could hear her own heartbeat over the rain hammering the warehouse roof. The man beside her was bleeding through his shirt. It had soaked past the fabric, past the makeshift pressure sheet applied with her delivery jacket, and now it was reaching her fingers, dark and warm and wrong. She had come here to drop off a package. $75 and change. That was all this was supposed to be. Two babies lay on a folded blanket between her knees. One was crying. The other had gone very still, wide dark eyes fixed on her face as if she were the only anchor in a world that had come apart. Lynette stared back at the child and tried to remember how to think. Outside, flashlight beams swept through the broken loading dock windows. Boots scraped against concrete. Men were calling to each other in Korean. Calm, methodical, organized. These were not men who panicked. They were men who finished things. The wounded man grabbed her wrist. His grip was stronger than it had any right to be. "Take them," he rasped. "Take them and run. Do not let them see your face." Lynette looked at the man, at the blood, at the tattoo barely visible beneath the torn fabric of his shirt, a white tiger surrounded by script she couldn't read, and she understood, with the slow, terrible clarity of someone standing inside a story that had already started without them, that the people outside were not searching for a thief or a fugitive. They were searching for him, and the moment they found him, those babies were going to become a loose end. A flashlight beam swept the crate, 6 inches from her shoulder. She pulled the babies to her chest and didn't breathe. Earlier that night, before we go further, if you're already hooked, hit that like button right now and drop your city in the comments. We want to know where in the world our listeners are watching from. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Lynette Rowan was 27 years old and tired in the kind of way that sleep couldn't fix. She'd been a nursing student once. Good at it, too. Her professors said she had instincts, the kind you couldn't teach, the kind that came from paying real attention to people. She believed, for 2 years, that medicine was going to be the thing that finally made sense of her life. Then her father got sick, and then he died, and then the bills came. She'd taken the delivery job as a temporary fix. That had been 14 months ago. The student loan statements still sat unopened on her kitchen counter because the number on the first page had made her feel like the floor was moving. Her younger sister Cameron thought she should go back. Cameron said it every time she came over, perched on the kitchen counter with a smoothie and the kind of optimism that only works when someone else is paying your rent. "You are literally built for this, Lynette. You're wasting yourself driving around in the rain. Driving around in the rain pays for the Wi-Fi you're using right now." Cameron had laughed and dropped the subject. She always did. She was good at knowing when to stop pushing, which was more than most people could say. Lynette loved her sister the way you love the one person who still remembers who you were before everything fell apart. Cameron was 25, ran a beauty studio out of a rented space downtown, made good money doing hair and filming content that people actually watched, and possessed a fearlessness that Lynette had long since stopped trying to explain or imitate. They were made of the same material. Nigerian father, Haitian mother, same thick braids, same dark eyes that people said could read a room. But Cameron had never learned to be cautious, and Lynette had never learned to stop. The request came in at 11:42 on a Tuesday. $80 plus tip. Rush delivery. A document package, sealed, no handling required. The destination listed was a cargo pier address in the Harbor District. a part of Harborside that most drivers avoided after dark because the streetlights had been broken for years and the city kept saying they'd fix them. Lynette sat in her car outside a gas station and stared at the address. Her instincts, the medical ones, the survival ones, the ones her father had installed in her before she was old enough to understand why, said no. Her bank account said yes. She accepted the delivery. The Pier District was exactly as dark as she remembered. Lynette pulled into the cargo lot slowly, her headlights catching chain-link fences and shipping containers stacked 4 high, their rust blending into the black. The address corresponded to a warehouse at the far end of the lot, a long, low building with a corrugated metal roof and loading bay doors that stood half open on their tracks. She parked. She didn't get out for a full minute. No other cars. No lights inside the building. The kind of silence that only exists in places that have been deliberately emptied. She called the recipient number on the delivery request. Straight to voicemail. A recorded message in Korean. She should have driven away. She knew she should have driven away. Then she heard the baby crying. Not loud. Not a scream. A thin, exhausted sound. The crying of a child who had been going for a long time and didn't have much left. It came from inside the warehouse, through the gap in the loading bay door, and it reached Lynette the way distress always reaches people who are built to respond to it, like a hook behind the sternum. She got out of the car. She told herself later that she hadn't decided to. Her body had simply moved. She crossed the gravel lot with her phone light on, ducked through the gap in the door, and followed the sound through the dark. The storage bay was large and mostly empty. Industrial shelving along the walls, a few stacked wooden pallets, the smell of diesel and something older, salt and rust, and a faint chemical edge. Her light swept the floor. She found them in the corner. A man, lying on his side against a support column. Dark clothing, soaked through from the shoulders down. 2 infant car seats beside him, both occupied, one baby crying, one baby silent. Shell casings on the concrete near the man's legs. A pistol 2 feet away from his outstretched hand, just far enough that he couldn't reach it. Lynette crouched. She pressed 2 fingers to the man's throat. Pulse, weak but present. Her hands were already moving before the rest of her caught up, checking for entry wounds, pressing the heel of her palm against the worst of the bleeding, reaching back into her mind for everything she hadn't used in 14 months. She counted at least 2 gunshot wounds. One to the side, one higher up. He'd lost a lot of blood. The fact that he was still alive was either medicine or a miracle. He opened his eyes. They were dark, and they were sharp, and they focused on her face with the precision of a man who was in a great deal of pain, but had not stopped thinking for a single second of it. You? He said something in Korean first. She didn't understand it. Then, they are coming. His English was accented and deliberate, each word placed like a careful step. Who is coming? He didn't answer that. Instead, how many minutes since you arrived? The question was so calm, so operational, that it startled her into answering. 4, maybe 5. He exhaled, something that might have been relief, or might have been calculation. Then we have very little time. Headlights cut through the gap in the loading dock. Tires on gravel. More than one vehicle. The man grabbed the fabric of her sleeve. If they see me, they kill the children. Please. Lynette looked at the man. She looked at the babies. She looked at the door. She grabbed both car seats. Getting out was the part she would not be able to explain afterward without laughing. If any of this ever became something she could laugh about. 1 car seat in each hand. A bleeding man she'd propped against her shoulder, moving through the back of a dark warehouse while 2 sets of car doors slammed outside and men's voices echoed against the walls. The crying baby had gone quiet, either sensing her urgency or too exhausted to continue. The silent one kept watching her with those enormous eyes. There was a side exit at the rear of the building. Emergency egress, the kind that opens from inside without a key. Lynette shouldered it open and cold lake air hit her face like a wall. She had parked facing out. That, at least, had been the right instinct. She loaded the babies into the back seat. She helped the man fold himself into the passenger seat. She didn't stop to ask his name or whether this was a good idea. She started the car with the lights off and pulled slowly along the fence line, away from the light the black SUVs were throwing across the lot. She was 50 meters down the access road before she turned the headlights on. She was 3 blocks away when her hands started shaking. "You are safe," the man said. He was looking in the passenger mirror. They did not follow. "That is not the thing I am most concerned about right now," Lynette said. She had not looked at him again since loading him into the car. Now, stopped at a red light at an empty intersection, she turned. The wound was still bleeding. He had one hand pressed against his side, and the other rested in his lap with a stillness that did not match the situation. His face was ashen but composed. His posture was almost formal, even half dead in her passenger seat. He sat like a man who was used to people waiting for him to speak. In the gap where his shirt had torn, she could see the tattoo clearly now. A white tiger, muscled and coiled, surrounded by Korean script arranged in a circular seal. The line work was not cheap. This was not a decoration. This was an insignia. The light turned green. She drove. She lived in a third-floor walk-up in the Millside neighborhood, 1,200 square feet, 2 bedrooms, and a kitchen where she did most of her thinking. She got the man up the stairs by letting him use her shoulder and not letting herself think about the blood on the hallway wall she'd have to clean before her landlord noticed. She put him on the couch. She put the babies on the floor on top of their blanket. They were both awake now, both quiet, both watching her with the particular alertness of children who have been frightened for a long time and are waiting for the next thing. She went to the bathroom. She came back with her emergency kit, the one she'd never quite been able to give up, even when she gave up everything else, and she started cleaning the wounds. He watched her work without flinching. "You have done this before," he said. Not a question. "I was going to be a nurse." Things happened. He didn't push it. She appreciated that. "What's your name?" she asked, pressing gauze to the higher wound with more force than was strictly necessary. "Kang Seojun." She didn't recognize it. She wouldn't have, under normal circumstances. She didn't follow organized crime news. She didn't pay attention to that world. Then the door opened, and Cameron walked in. Her sister stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds, taking in the scene. A bleeding Korean man on the couch, 2 babies on the floor, Lynette on her knees with bloody hands. "Okay," Cameron said slowly. "So I'm going to need significantly more information." Lynette turned to look at her. There was a speech she was preparing, something calm, something explanatory, something that made this sound like a sequence of reasonable decisions. Then the television in the corner, which Cameron had apparently turned on during the 3 seconds she'd been in the doorway, began cycling through late-night news. And the anchor said, "Breaking tonight, Korean national Kang Seojun, believed to be the head of the Kyeonryong syndicate, has been reported killed in an attack near Harborside's cargo district. Authorities have not confirmed." Cameron looked at the television. She looked at the man on the couch. She looked at Lynette. "Lynette, I know. That man on our couch. I know. Is the man they just said was dead on the news. I know, Cameron." A pause. "And you brought him here. He was bleeding and there were babies." Cameron stared at her for a long moment. Then she sat down on the floor next to the babies, picked up the smaller one, a girl, wrapped in a pale green blanket, and held her against her shoulder with the automatic comfort of someone who has always known what to do with something small and in need. "Okay," she said again. Walk me through it. Imagine this. What if you were in Lynette's position right now? A wounded crime lord on your couch, two babies on the floor, and your sister staring at you like you've lost your mind. What would you do? Would you call the police? Would you run? Drop your honest answer in the comments. And if this story has you locked in, hit the like button. Your support keeps these stories coming. Seojun told them everything. Not because he trusted them. They could see that. He told them because he was running calculations, and the calculation said that these two women already knew too much to walk away safely, which meant their interests were now aligned whether any of them liked it or not. His wife's name was Han Yura. They had married young, an arrangement between families, the kind of union that made strategic sense for two people inside the world they'd both been born into. There had been something real between them once, or at least the ghost of something. That had been a long time ago. The Keon Ryong Circle, the Heavenly Dragon Syndicate, had been his father's organization before it became his. Seojun had spent 8 years quietly, systematically reshaping it, moving assets into legitimate sectors, building corporate intelligence infrastructure, cultivating relationships with people who would help them cross the line from shadow to legal. Yura had pretended to support it. She had not supported it. She believed that the only power worth having was the kind that didn't need legitimacy, the kind that operated in the dark, that made people afraid. She had spent 2 years building a faction inside the syndicate. Men who agreed with her. Men who thought Seojun's vision was weakness. Tonight had been their move. The babies complicated things. Under Keon Ryong tradition, organizational leadership could only transfer through blood heirs. One of the children, the girl, Sohee, was Seojun's biological daughter. The boy, Ryo, was the son of his deceased sworn brother, adopted into Seojun's household under the same tradition that made him equally protected. Without the heirs, Yura's claim to leadership was clean and simple. With the heirs alive, her coup had a problem. She doesn't know they're alive. Seojun said, "She doesn't know I'm alive." "And how long does that last?" Lynette asked. He looked at her steadily. "Hours, not more." Outside, a car slowed on the street below. All three of them looked at the window at the same time. The car stopped. A door opened. Footsteps on pavement. "Back door," Seojun said, already moving. Lynette grabbed both babies. Cameron grabbed her coat, Lynette's bag, and somehow also a box of granola bars from the kitchen counter. Later, when Lynette asked her why, she shrugged and said she didn't like not having options. They went down the back stairs in the dark, Seojun moving better than any man with 2 bullet wounds had a right to, and out through the service alley behind the building. Behind them, through the thin walls, they heard the lobby buzzer going. Once, twice, then the sound of the building's front door being forced. They kept moving. The safe house was a commercial laundry facility in the warehouse district, legitimately licensed, regularly inspected, entirely unremarkable, with a concealed lower level that Seojun accessed with a code Lynette suspected changed every 48 hours. Inside, a clean room, cots, a medical kit that made Lynette's emergency bag look like a toy, encrypted communications equipment, and a man named Park who was small and quiet, and had the eyes of someone who had done a great deal of difficult mathematics over his lifetime. Park said something in Korean to Seojun. Seojun replied. Park looked at Lynette and Cameron, then back at Seojun, with the expression of a man who has stopped being surprised by anything. "He wants to know if we want tea," Seojun said. Cameron looked at Lynette. "I would like tea," she said, with a sincerity that made Lynette start laughing, the kind of laugh that comes out of the wrong end of too much adrenaline. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. Cameron was already nodding at Park with the dignity of someone who had been invited to a very normal social gathering. "Yes, please. Thank you." Park made tea. Seojun watched the interaction with an expression Lynette couldn't quite categorize, something that hadn't been on his face since she found him bleeding on a warehouse floor. Something that might, in another context, have been close to the neighborhood of warmth. She redressed his wounds with the proper equipment. He sat still for it, looking at the wall, and for a few minutes there was no sound in the room except the baby's breathing and the distant hum of industrial equipment somewhere above them. "You could have left us at the warehouse." His voice was quiet, not accusatory, almost careful. "I know. You still can. I can arrange money, documentation, a safe route out of Harborside. You and your sister." Lynette looked at Sohee, asleep now in the car seat. Her small face turned to the side, one hand fisted against her cheek. "Those babies aren't going anywhere with people who are trying to kill them." A pause. "Even if staying puts you in danger. Especially then." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, something that might have been calculation and might have been something older and harder to name. "Then you need to understand what you're staying inside of." What she was staying inside of was this. Han Yura had called an emergency gathering of the Kyeonryong Circle's inner council. It would happen in 12 hours, at a location Seojun's remaining allies were still trying to determine. At that meeting, Yura would present her version of events. Seojun was dead. The heirs were missing and presumed lost. Leadership must be confirmed and secured. If she got that confirmation before the heirs resurfaced, the transfer of power was done. Untouchable. Even Seojun showing up alive afterward would only destabilize, not reverse. Park had located a fragment of digital evidence, financial records from shell accounts, communications between Yura and the men who'd carried out the attack. Not everything. Enough. Enough, Seojun believed, to bring at least some of the council back. And if it's not enough? Cameron asked. She was sitting cross-legged on a cot. Feeding Rio from a bottle Park had somehow produced, radiating the calm of someone who had decided that if they were going to be in this situation, they might as well be useful in it. "Then we improvise," Seojun said. Cameron looked at him over the baby's head. "That is not a plan. That's a wish." The corner of Seojun's mouth moved, almost imperceptible. "Then we will wish very precisely." The council met in a private dining room above a restaurant in the financial district, the kind of space that didn't exist on any floor plan, accessed through a kitchen corridor that required knowing exactly which door to open. Seojun walked in first. The room went silent with the specific quality of a silence that contains many emotions at once. Shock, recalculation, fear, relief, and, in at least two faces, something that looked like guilt. 7 men around a long table. At the far end, Hanyura. She was 31 years old and looked exactly like what she was. Someone who had prepared for this moment for years. Her suit was immaculate. Her composure was absolute. For exactly 3 seconds, it cracked. Then she assembled it back. "You're dead," she said. Flat. Factual. As if insisting might make it so. "I was inconvenienced," Seojun replied. He moved to the head of the table. He did not sit. He stood, and the room organized itself around him the way rooms had always organized themselves around him. Not because of fear alone, but because there was something in his stillness that was more commanding than noise. "The heirs are safe," he said. To the council, not to her. The attack on this organization was not external. It came from within. "I have evidence of financial transfers, communications, and authorization for violence against myself and the blood heirs of this circle. I am asking this council to review it before any decisions are made." Yura stood. "This is a performance. He's desperate. Whatever he's showing you was fabricated. By me," said a voice from the side of the room. Everyone turned. Cameron Rowan was standing next to a screen that had been set up while Yura was talking. She and Park had moved through the kitchen corridor 20 minutes before Seojun entered, which had been the precise wish. On the screen were documents, account numbers, transfer logs, a voice recording that the room heard in silence, and that made two of the council members set down the drinks they were holding. "I don't know most of you," Cameron said, with the easy authority of someone who presented to an audience every week. "But I know what financial fraud looks like. I know what a contract for murder looks like. And I know what it means when someone's name is on both." The room turned, slowly, to Han Yura. She didn't argue. She reached into her jacket instead. She was fast, faster than Lynette would have expected. The gun cleared the holster and swung toward the car seats that Lynette had carried in through the kitchen entrance. So he and Rio, still asleep, visible through the open doorway. It was the move of someone who understood that the heirs were the only thing that mattered. Kill them, and the evidence became irrelevant. Kill them, and the question of succession reopened. Seojun was already moving. He crossed the room in a way that didn't seem to have a middle. He was at the table, and then he was there, one hand on her wrist, redirecting the weapon upward. The shot went into the ceiling. Plaster dust. The room erupted. Men scrambling back. Two of the loyal guards who had been stationed outside coming through the door hard. Yura fought. She was not someone who gave up a position. But Seojun was not someone who lost one. It was over in under a minute. She was restrained. The gun was gone. And Seojun stood in the center of the room, breathing carefully through his nose because his side still hurt, and he was not going to let anyone in this room see that. And he looked at the council the way you look at people you have decided to keep. Her faction will be identified and removed. He said, "This organization will not fracture. It will change. The direction I have been building toward, legitimacy, restructure, operating above the line, that direction does not change. If anyone at this table cannot accept that, this is the moment to say so." Silence. No one spoke. Lynette was in the kitchen with the babies when the council meeting ended. She heard the shift in noise, the low murmur of men reaching conclusions, and she sat with Sohee in her lap and Rio propped against her side, and she thought about her father, which she hadn't allowed herself to do in a very long time. He had been a nurse too, before he became other things. He'd told her once that the best thing about medicine was that it didn't ask whether you deserved to be saved. It just asked whether you were willing to try. She wondered what he would have made of tonight. Seojun appeared in the doorway. He looked at her with the children and didn't say anything for a moment. There was something in his expression that was very far from the calculating stillness of the man she'd met on a warehouse floor. Something that was simply, plainly, human. "It's done," he said. "Is she contained? The council will handle what follows." Lynette nodded. She looked down at Sohee, who had wrapped one small hand around her finger sometime in the last hour and not let go. "What happens to them now?" He crossed to where she was sitting and crouched in front of the children, at eye level with them. "They grow up." It was the simplest thing he'd said all night, and somehow it hit harder than all of it. Those children deserve a future without this life. Lynette said, quietly, not an accusation, a truth. He didn't look away from Sohee. "I know," he said. "I know." 1 year later, the Kyeonryong Circle did not exist anymore. What existed in its place was a corporate security and intelligence firm, licensed, audited, operating above the line Seojun had spent years trying to reach. Some members left. Some went to prison for what they'd done under the old structure. The ones who stayed built something different. Lynette Rowan went back to nursing school. She finished in 11 months, which was not a record, but was the kind of achievement that feels like one when you've spent 2 years convincing yourself it wasn't possible. She worked the clinic attached to the firm's main campus, a choice that surprised people who didn't know her and surprised no one who did. Cameron expanded her beauty studio to 2 locations. She had not stopped talking about the council room incident, a fact that Lynette pointed out regularly and that Cameron ignored completely. I was incredible in there. Cameron would say, you were terrifying. Lynette would reply, those are the same thing. So he and Rio were growing. The way children grow when they are safe, which is fast and funny and constant, always becoming more themselves than you expected. So he had a serious face and a smile that appeared without warning. Rio had decided that Cameron was the most interesting person alive and followed her around the office with the devotion of a small, determined satellite. On a Tuesday evening in late autumn, Seojun found Lynette in the clinic after hours, updating patient files. He stood in the doorway the same way she had stood in the warehouse doorway, not quite entering, calibrating. She looked up. You're not a patient, she said. No. He came in and sat across from her desk, an unusual thing for a man who did not normally place himself in the lesser chair. And he looked at her with that careful, measuring look that she had learned, over 12 months, to read accurately. That night you found me, he said. I know, she said, because she did by now. She knew what he was going to say. You didn't just save my life. She looked at him. You changed the future of everything I had built. Outside, through the clinic window, the lake caught the last of the evening light, that particular gray gold that belonged to this city and no other. Inside, in the soft quiet of a room that smelled like antiseptic and old paper and something beginning, Lynette Rowan set down her pen. She had driven to a dark warehouse for $75 and a delivery tip. She had come back from it with something she hadn't realized she'd lost, a reason to keep building. A sense that the choices you make in the dark, when no one sees, when there's no logic to it, when it's just instinct and the sound of a child crying, are the ones that decide who you are. She had not expected to find that in a man like Seojun. She had not expected to find it at all, but she was, as her father had always said, very good at paying attention. She smiled, and so did he. And that's where we leave them, not with a perfect ending, but with a real one. A woman who chose compassion when every instinct said run. A man who chose transformation when everything around him said hold on. Two babies with a future, and a question that lingers. How much does one decision in the dark really cost? If this story stayed with you, like the button and drop your city in the comments. We want to know where in the world you're listening from tonight. See you in the next one.